Hello, I'm Dan Rather, and welcome to the CBS Evening News online edition. Just ahead, no death penalty for people under 18. How did the Supreme Court reach their decision? We'll have the details. Also, back to Iraq. Believe it or not, an amputee is on his way. How did he do it? We'll give you the inside story. And the battle for civil rights. It's hard to believe that it was just 40 years ago. We'll give you a look back in a reporter's notebook. It's all starting now on the CBS Evening News online edition. The United States Supreme Court today put a new restriction on the death penalty, a new age restriction. The court, sharply divided, said the death penalty may not be applied to anyone whose crime was committed before age 18. The majority cited maturity differences between juveniles and adults and said there's a national consensus against executing juveniles. This ruling strikes down juvenile death penalty laws in the 19 states that have them, and as CBS's Jim Stewart reports, it spares the lives of dozens of killers.
Teenage Washington area sniper Lee Boyd Malvo got the news within hours of the High Court's decision. Bowing to the inevitable, prosecutors in his case said there was no point now in going forward with his death penalty trial. Malvo instead will serve a life sentence without parole, as will most of the 72 men in 12 states who are already on death row for crimes committed before their 18th birthday, including 43-year-old Timothy Davis in Alabama, who's been there the longest, and 18-year-old Robert Acuna in Texas, who just arrived. Acuna's mother was relieved, arguing that crimes committed as a juvenile don't deserve the ultimate grown-up punishment.
Killing someone in the name of justice doesn't do anything except make more victims.
Victims' relatives saw it differently, however. Death row inmate Whitney Reeves committed a double murder in Texas, but will now walk off death row by the slimmest of margins.
He was one day shy of 18 years old when it happened, and he knew very well what he was doing.
It was a 5-4 decision, with Justice Anthony Kennedy providing the key swing vote and writing the majority opinion. The age of 18 is where society draws the line, he wrote. It is, we conclude, the age at which the line for death eligibility ought to rest. Not so, countered Justice Sandra Day O'Connor for the minority. Common experience suggests that many 17-year-olds are more mature than the average young adult. Death penalty opponents say international pressure was also at work.
This is very much in line with the way the human rights community, the United Nations, all are going, and we're in fact pushing the U.S.
This may not be the last word in this argument, however. Social conservatives would like a rematch and may get it if President Bush makes one or more new appointments to the court later this year, as expected. Jim Stewart, CBS News at the Supreme Court.
The U.S. military in Iraq reported today that 2 more American soldiers were killed north of Baghdad. Total U.S. casualties in the war are now approaching at least 1,500 dead and more than 11,000 wounded. Many of those wounded lost limbs, and for most of them, the war is over. There is one notable exception, an Army captain we've reported on before. He's going back in action. CBS's Lee Cowan gives you the inside story.
Captain David Roselle has become the poster boy for the American soldier. Not because he's going back to Iraq, but because of what he's going back without.
You're not the only one.
I'm not the only one, but I am the first.
The first amputee, not only to be deemed fit for combat, but the first to be given a combat command in Iraq.
Why should I stay back in safety when my brothers in arms, who are also fit for duty, are having to go fight?
His foot was blown off when his Humvee hit a landmine outside Baghdad.
Feels good.
When we first met him, his goal was pretty simple: prove that he could be a soldier again. He tried to run before he could even walk.
There you go. Oh!
And that was just a hint of his determination. Nothing has changed in a year and a half.
I'm still willing to give my whole body if I have to, because I believe in it.
He learned to walk faster than most amputees. Then it was biking, then hiking, then running. He entered and finished the New York City Marathon, all with his wife and son at his side.
He has not changed, and that was one of the things that I try to make sure of in his healing, that he did not change and become a bitter, depressed soul.
Yee-hoo, getting dizzy.
When he took us skiing, he reminded us that all this fun had a serious purpose.
I got business to take care of. There's a war to win.
Well, thank you for sharing those words.
Absolutely,
sir.
man.
His journey back to health became a book, which was so popular it's already in its second printing. He's been invited to teach at West Point and to counsel at Walter Reed Hospital, but he's put it all off until he marches home from war again. The man with that eternal sense of optimism, the one with such determination to return to duty, is also under no illusions that he still has to pass the toughest test of all.
It's very sobering and very real for me to think that I may go back and be severely injured again.
Nerves that have been tested once, back at attention again. Lee Cowan, CBS News, Fort Carson, Colorado.
We end tonight with another page from a reporter's notebook and a story we began reporting more than 4 decades ago. A story that all these years later is still not over. It's the struggle of African heritage for civil rights. When James Meredith stepped up to the door of the University of Mississippi in September 1962, hatred overruled the law of the land. It took the federal courts and federal troops to get Meredith in, and 2 people were killed in riots the night before he started classes.
James, why do you want to enter the University of Mississippi?
Well, I think that every citizen should have an opportunity to receive an education in his own state.
The first African American enrolled meant the color line was crossed but not overcome.
In those days, we couldn't register, we couldn't vote, we couldn't go to any of the schools.
Years before Meredith applied, Charles Evers' brother, Medgar, tried to get into Ole Miss. When he became leader of Mississippi's branch of the NAACP, he fought for Meredith and took on the most dangerous assignment of all, signing up African Americans to vote. It's hard for any American who wasn't alive during that time to imagine what it was, not just in Mississippi, but in a number of places at that time.
That was just 40 years ago. Just 40 years ago. You remember we couldn't even walk down the street. If you bumped against a white woman then, that was suicide.
By the spring of 1963, demands for equal rights were met with fire hoses and bullets. And on June 12th, as he came home from a voter registration meeting, Medgar Evers was shot in the back and killed. He was 37 years old.
He believed in his country. It now remains to be seen whether his country believes in him.
I could not let him go in vain.
When we first met, the day after his brother's murder, Charles Evers wanted nothing to do with any white people.
I was going to kill white people until they killed me, which was wrong. And somehow the maker just spoke to me, I guess, from the grave and said, "Child, that ain't the way."
A month after the assassination of your brother, I was back in Jackson. And by that time, you were organizing for the NAACP. We have a piece of videotape of the film taken at that time. I want to show it to you.
There were widespread predictions that Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, might become the next major racial battleground in the South.
We're going to vote solid, whether they like it or not. And we're not going to use one bullet in the back of not one of our white brothers to do so.
So many things strike me when I look at that report from so many years ago. When I talked to you the day after the night your brother was slain, you weren't thinking about white brothers at that time.
No. Well, I guess I'd be like any other person. Somebody kill your brother, be black, white, or polka dot. You wouldn't be thinking about them either. I was only concerned about me and my folks. Thank you very much.
Today, Charles Evers hosts a talk show on his own radio station in Jackson. It's now a fully desegregated city. A victory won by the bravest of Americans. How slow was change to come?
It was slow.
Did you think you would live to see it?
I didn't. No, I didn't. Because I thought I'd be killed long before then.
More stories are just a click away. But be sure to join me on television for the on-air edition of the CBS Evening News. On Wednesday's broadcast, Vietnam Remembered. On the ground, a bitter conflict. Back home, a nation divided. You'll see it through the eyes of some who lived it in A Reporter's Notebook. For CBSNews.com, I'm Dan Rather.